Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on the Cradle to Career Data System. My name is Kathy Booth. I work with an organization called WestEd, and I'm the process facilitator to help design this new data system. So let me talk a little bit about what today's session is going to be about. My first goal is to make sure that I can give you information about what the Cradle to Career data system is going to be and the planning process that's been used to come up with that proposal. I want to answer your questions about that process and any information you want to know about the data system. And also, I'd love to get input from you. We're really curious to know if you're likely to use the type of tools that have been proposed and any other input about ways to make sure that the information is going to be actually useful for you. So this is our challenge, and I'm sure that all of you have experienced this. In this moment with the pandemic, it has become clear that in order to understand what makes it possible for Californians to progress toward their goals, we have to know things about them from different vantage points. We need to know about their health, about their economic circumstances, about their education, in order to put together the types of interventions that are going to make a difference in addressing equity gaps. So California has a lot of really great information right now, but right now all of those data systems are separate from each other. And as you probably know, it's very difficult to get that information integrated in a way that helps us really understand what's happening to people that makes it possible to achieve their dreams or what gets in the way. And just as important as that, we need to make sure that when we put data together, we put the right information together and we get it in the hands of the right people. Actionable data is a challenge. There's a lot of information that we collect that's lagging. It's something that happened in the past, or we don't get it out to the people that really need it. It's put it out in a format that is too technical for average people to make use of that information. So part of what we need to do is figure out, once we get this data connected, how we make it truly useful for everybody. So luckily, there is an effort underway to do just this. Back in 2019, the legislature passed the Cradle to Career Data System Act, the goal of which was to figure out how we could get all of the information we have in California connected together, and to make it not just education data, but to bring together education, social service, health, and workforce information. So the act laid out an 18-month planning process. Many of you may have been thinking to yourself, I think we've been through this before. California has been trying for a very long time to figure out a way to put their information together. We are one of the last states in the country to build a longitudinal data system, and yet it feels like the stars have really aligned to make it possible right now. We have a governor who believes strongly in data. We have many different players from the various agencies that are very eager to get their information connected. And so that's what we've been spending time doing. So WestEd is the process facilitator, and all of this is happening under the auspices of the governor's office. So there's a lot of people that are involved in figuring out how to design this solution. So as the name implies, Cradle to Career is looking at the full arc of Californians' lives, really understanding what's happening to them over long periods of time. And therefore, the planning process involves many different representatives that can really speak to that entire arc and look at not just education, but also social service, health, employment-related issues that help us understand the whole person and what happens that shapes those outcomes. Not only does this planning and process focus on the entities that are going to put data into the system, it's also including the people that are going to be the users of that information to make sure that we have practitioners and representatives of families and communities helping make sure that the system really is going to align with the information that they need. So all told, we've had more than 170 people involved in this planning process, representing a broad range of expertise necessary to come up with all the components that would allow us to get rolling on building a data system as soon as possible. So here's where we are in the planning timeline. We've been using what we call a user-centered design process, which means we start by figuring out what information would actually be useful and how would people use it, and then figuring out how to get it put together. So over the course of 2020, we were able to identify the core products that would be in the data system. We figured out how it should be focused and what the structure of it would be, where it would live. It's going to be hosted by the Government Operations Agency, which is a neutral entity that provides support to many other state agencies and has a lot of expertise in technology. We've identified the governance structure, making sure that there's a large role for the public and the users of the data in addition to the people that are providing the data. We figured out what information is going to be in the data system and how people could get access to it. And we are now moving in on the final development of our preliminary timeline and budget in preparation for a report to the legislature that's due at the end of December. The process will continue for another 6 months after that, which is where we're really going to be coming up with a lot of the technical documentation, the blueprint that's necessary to get the data system off the ground. So one of the first things I always get asked as I'm explaining this process is people get very excited and say, well, how soon can we actually have this information? So we are working toward this initial legislative report that'll be done by the end of next month. The goal of getting it to the legislature means that it's possible that then the funding for the data system can be included in the budget for our next fiscal year, so starting in July of 2021. What we know from other states is that it takes about a year to get all the data loaded into a system, linked, and making sure that the data is in really good shape. So we're looking at least a year and a half before this thing would be up and running. But because of the intensity of this planning process, we'll be able to stand up the data system pretty quickly because we've worked through many of the hurdles, the legal and technical challenges that tend to slow down the development of data systems. So even before the money's in place, we'll have the blueprint ready to go. So let's talk a little bit about what actually has been proposed. So the first thing I want to do is show you the vision and mission statements because I think it helps make clear what the data system is intended to do. So when we started the planning process, we heard a lot of different ideas about what Cradle to Career could be. So I heard everything from it's an analytical data set for researchers to it's an app like Yelp that would help people find childcare in their neighborhood. So we spent that first 4 months really looking carefully at what it is that we could produce in a relatively short time frame that would serve the needs of Californians with available information. So really, we're talking about something that's going to be like a data store, a neutral provider of trusted information that helps us really understand what happens to Californians over time. And importantly, is looking broadly at what constitutes that evolution, especially the way that people get education and training. So not only will we be looking at like public and private education, whether it's in K-12 or post-secondary, we'll also be looking at skills training and other ways that people build skills and evolve with the job market. We know right now in particular, this is really important as people will be reskilling due to the restructuring of our economy, and will understand their employment outcomes, including whether they're getting to living wages. The intent of putting the information together is to give the kinds of information that people need to engage in evidence-based decision-making with a focus on an equitable future. So really, how can we get the right information out to people so that whether you're a family member, a practitioner, like an educator, or someone who works in social services, a policymaker, an advocate, you would have the information that you need to help drive the actions that we need to take as a state. So this will be a neutral entity, and it will be intending to serve a wide variety of individuals. So not just that analytical data set, but students and families as well. So there's two different types of tools that the data system is going to be producing. The first is going to be focusing on information that's for and about specific students and courses. So for those of you that are practitioners, you know that it is valuable to understand that 30% of your students are hungry or homeless. It's much more useful to know which of those students are hungry or homeless. So one of the proposals is that we're going to be putting together a series of tools that are about individual students. And we're going to do so by scaling two existing state-funded projects that already are having a big impact in the state. So that's California Colleges EDU, which runs the California College Guidance Initiative, and eTranscript California. So there's 5 different things that fit under this heading. The first is providing college and career planning tools and curriculum that would be freely available to all K-12 institutions so they could really get started in helping students understand what their options are related to what they could be when they grow up and the way they're going to build the skills they need to get there. Along with that will be college eligibility monitoring tools. So basically ways that a student or their parents or a counselor at their high school could figure out whether they're taking the right courses in order to apply to the colleges that they want to attend. The third component are electronic transcripts. So we know right now it has been so difficult to figure out how to get those pieces of paper transferred from high schools to the colleges to which students want to apply. So the idea is that we can make all of this available electronically. So no matter what happens with the time frame for getting back into our schools, it will be possible for people to share their records. And importantly, these transcripts will not just be the traditional things that you would expect, the high school courses you took, the college courses you took if you're switching colleges, but also including non-traditional learning artifacts like badges and competency-based education that'll help us prepare for the retooling that needs to be done given what's happened with the pandemic. The fourth option is something that puts power in the hands of students to alert colleges that they're applying to about their social service history that can help with determining eligibility for supports related to food, housing, and other services like financial aid for foster youth. And finally, we'll be looking at support for local education agencies to make sure their data is in good shape so all of these tools work effectively together. So we're calling those our operational tools. In addition to that, oops, actually, I'm going to stop for a second for a little bit of a Q&A. So I'm curious, how do you think, like, what do you think of these operational tools? Do you think they would provide useful information, and what would help you use them? So go ahead and use the Q&A function to be able to put your questions or your comments in that forum. And my colleague LeAnn's going to share with me if anything's coming up. You can also use this opportunity to ask any questions that you have about the planning process. Not getting any questions, LeAnn? Well, I'm just so curious. Is there anyone here? Oh, I do see one that's come in. Go ahead, LeAnn. Could you read it to me?
Sure. Stephen mentions that we need shared data and goals.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we needed to figure out for this is what the goals of sharing the data were. So one of the goals here was to make sure that everybody has access to information about what their college and career options are. One of the challenges if you're first in your family to college is you may not even know about types of careers that are out there. You may not understand the difference between a community college, a CSU, and a UC. You may not know where to get the financial aid that would make it possible for you to attend. And so by having these tools that give that information out, that make sure that the people who work at high schools can support students in navigating the choices they need to make while they're still in high school about the right courses are in everybody's hands so that we can reduce some of those equity gaps for folks that just wouldn't be in the place to know without a little extra support. Got another question?
Yes. Victoria would like to know, how would this information be made available?
So let's go back and take a look at the tools. So the college and career planning tools and curriculum actually already exist. So if you go to californiacolleges.edu, there's a portal that's in the public domain, and you can see a lot of the information that's available. So people would have access to those tools. The college eligibility tools right now are being delivered to a large portion of the state, particularly the Central Valley and Inland Empire. So in those cases, we're talking about a password protected tool. You want to make sure that only that student and their guardians or parents and the appropriate people at the high school are able to look and see where they are if they're on target for taking the right courses. So that's going to happen through a password protected portal. Same thing for triggering the transfer of electronic transcripts that's embedded into the application forms that students are using when they're applying to public post-secondary institutions. So those are some of the ways that we'll get the data connected up so people can get access to it.
We have another question from Elizabeth. She's wondering if there is a vision for the development of shared goals for the child serving agencies in California, such as literacy and career readiness, etc.
So the intention for the Cradle to Career data system is not to set the goals, but to provide the information necessary for other coalitions to work together to set their own goals. So we know, for example, there's a master plan being developed for early learning and care. And so the idea is that the information in this data system would help to support people acting on that vision in order to figure out a way forward. But this entity is not going to make policy recommendations. It's really there to be neutral.
No other questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the analytical tools now that we've taken a look at that. So One of the things that most states have done when they link their data together is they make it available for researchers, which is great. Researchers are able to get in and connect data and come up with answers to really complicated questions. But one of the things that we are seeing increasingly is the value of dashboards as a way for people, anyone from the public, to go and take a look. I don't know about you, but I go check those dashboards that look at changes in infection rates related to COVID. So one of the ideas in this proposal is that there's going to be a lot of information made broadly available to the public. And the idea is that some of this is going to be through interactive dashboards that'll function more like infographics. So instead of a dense, a lot of numbers, like little teeny tiny type, the idea is it'll be more like images that really help us understand some of the key inflection points as students move through their journeys. In addition to that, there's going to be a very powerful query builder tool. So for those of you that like to get your geek on and put different data elements together, it would let you mix and match various elements, 160 different data points that have been identified by the work group that would allow you to put together some information on a group of students. All these things could be downloaded and you can get access to it anytime you want, 24/7 on a public website. In addition to that, there's going to be an opportunity for people to get access to data through a request process. So if they want information that's not available in those public tools, there's a very fast process. We're hoping it'll be about a month where you could get a data file as long as you're looking at aggregate data. So what does that mean? We're talking about groups of students, like more than 10 individuals. So you would never know who the specific students are, but you could still look at trends and understand the complexity of what happens to individuals within a system. Or for much more detailed data research projects where you really need to look at individual records, there will be a process by which it can be requested. That's called unitary data, meaning we're understanding what's happening to one particular student. Because this is much more sensitive, there's a lot of attention to security and privacy built into this process. So there would be a review process that's quite robust that would make sure that that information is appropriately used and kept secure. And that would be about a 3-month time period to get sort of a green light about whether you can move ahead. So one of the things that's really important in this is to make sure that we're very clear that the information is going to be kept private. It's not going to be politicized. So as we mentioned, the Government Operations Agency is going to be the host for this data system. This is an entity that is, accountable to the taxpayers. It is not an entity that currently does its own research or issues policy statements. It's really there to provide the backbone for the system. So for example, GovOps supports PERS and STIRS, our retirement system. It supports the California Department of Technology that just works on all the procurement processes to get the tools in place. So they're going to have all that expertise that they already have intact in order to make sure that this information is kept completely secure. As I mentioned earlier, that if you're going to be looking at information about individuals for those operational tools like the eligibility tool, you're going to be in a password protected interface that's going to make sure only the appropriate people are seeing that information. And almost all of the information that's going to come out of this data system will be anonymized because it's going to be, whether it's in those dashboards or the quick expedited process for getting other types of data for research, it's already going to be treated to make sure that no individual identities can be discerned for the information going out of this system. And again, the data request process is quite robust to make sure if we're ever looking at data for individuals for research purposes, it's being done in a very secure environment. In fact, we're going to create a secure data enclave so those researchers are working within an environment that's controlled by GovOps and they can't take the data out. Looks like we've got a question, LeAnn.
Yes. Victoria would like to know if individual children and families need to opt in to allow use of their data, or are data points collected directly through the different institutions and programs for all individuals through data sharing agreements and mandates, et cetera?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of the ideas behind this data system is we want to have information that is already available through the state agencies. So there's no new data that's going to be collected from the system, and therefore we don't need to get new permissions in order for the data to be shared. There will be a series of legal agreements that make sure that when information is shared, for example, from the California Department of Education about people that are under the age of 18, that it's done in accordance with all federal and state laws to keep that data secure, but there's no additional work that needs to be done to allow for the information to be shared. I think I mentioned earlier that California is one of the only states that does not have these longitudinal data systems. Most other states have been working with this type of information for a large number of years, and there are federal technical assistance providers that have really worked through questions of privacy and security to make sure that data can be legally shared while keeping information private for individuals. So we're building on all that experience and expertise. So let's talk a little bit about that dashboard. So one of the ideas is we want to make it possible for people to be able to look at information in a lot of different ways. So you can pick different time frames, you can pick different geographies, like if you want to look at the difference between the Central Valley and the Bay Area. You can pick individual institutions. I could go look at my kids' high school. You can also sort information by all sorts of different demographics and characteristics for individuals. And then you'd be able to export these results. Again, with its groupings of students, so you're never going to be able to see information on any individual student out of the dashboard. The content of the dashboards was based on work that was done to figure out what actions could families, teachers, administrators, policymakers actually take on the information that's available. So again, the focus was on actionability. And then wherever possible, rather than just focus on what's happening to individual students, it's really trying to provide context for what's happening. I think this is one of the ways that the state's responding to all the calls for racial justice that have happened this year, rather than making it possible to sort of look at a student and blame them because of some element of their demographics. It's really saying, well, what's going on in that school? What's going on in that community that might make it easier or harder for the student to attain those particular benchmarks? So the things that will be in the dashboard, the first is a pathway diagram. So we'll start with individuals in early learning and care, and then follow them all the way through their educational experience through K-12, post-secondary if they go to college, when they enter the workforce, which of course may be well before they finish college if they go, and also at the point at which they attain a living wage. So we really understand who it is that is making it to prosperity in our state and who is not, and where it is that they run into barriers that make it difficult to attain those goals. Then in addition to that, there's going to be information on 6 inflection points, looking at key milestones that students tend to go through that makes a difference in their long-term outcomes. So we'll look at what's happening to students in primary school based on their participation in early learning and care. We'll be looking at chronic absenteeism and what that does, starting in elementary school for high school and college outcomes, looking at that in the context of high school counseling ratios to really understand if schools are able to get in and provide support when students are missing school. We'll be looking at which of our high school students are enrolling in post-secondary, what kind of post-secondary institution they go to, how well they do in that first year, and whether they get to the goals of earning a certificate or a degree. For our community college students, we'll be looking at that transfer pipeline to see who's becoming eligible and actually making it to a 4-year institution and if they get their bachelor's degree. We'll be looking pretty intensively on financial aid. So basically, how many students are actually getting financial aid, and does there appear to be a relationship between getting financial aid and what students end up studying, as well as the debt that they incur afterwards? And finally, we'll be able to understand what happens when students enter the job market. Do they get jobs? How much are they earning? Are they getting a living wage? And are they improving their earnings over time? The Query Builder tool is going to provide a very powerful way to dig even deeper on some of these concepts. So as I mentioned, there's 160 variables that can be pulled into tables and charts. As you can see on this page, there's so many different types of things that you could be looking at. For example, if you want to understand student experience, you can look at it based on how much they're actually in school, if they're attending multiple schools, what type of courses they're taking, if they're successful in those courses, what they're majoring in. You can understand more about the supports they're receiving. In addition to financial aid, are they participating in CalWORKs, CalFresh, or Medi-Cal? We'll be able to look at a lot of information on location, for example, at political districts in case you want to do lobbying or organizing in your community. So a lot of information that would be readily available to everybody through the Query Builder. So are there any questions about the dashboards and the Query Builder tools, or any input about whether you think you'd use them? No questions yet? Okay. All right, so the last thing, as I mentioned, was this data request process. What's important about this, again, is the protection of individual identities, but just as importantly, for those of you who have requested data and had difficulty getting it, the idea is to reduce the time frame for getting the information. And that'll be possible because there are templates for the legal agreements that make it easier to get through that part of the process. Also, the managing entity, the GovOps, will be able to pull those data files on behalf of the agencies, thereby reducing the burden on them. And finally, if there's public accountability. So if people put in data requests and they are denied by any of the data providers, they will provide a reason on the public website, so you'll know what it is that makes it possible to get or not get information, as well as a record of who's been requesting information and what it is they wanted to know. Looks like we've got a question.
Yes, Tony would like to know if you currently have data sets to access for the Query Builder.
So the data sets have been identified. So for the Query Builder tool, we have all 160 of those data points identified, but they're not yet in the system. That'll be what'll happen in the first year, hopefully starting as early as July of next year, where we'll be able to pull from existing data that are already collected by these state agencies and then put it together to generate that Query Builder tool. All right, so any questions about the process of requesting information? Yep.
Tony would also like to know if there is data matching across the data sets.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So one of the things that'll be very powerful is our ability to link records. So first of all, we're going to have to figure out, is this Kathy Booth the same Kathy Booth that's in that other data set? So there's a whole process that has been identified for how records across different providers can be linked together, and we can determine whether it's the same individual or even rate how much we think that's a reliable match. In addition to that, we'll be able to link data sets together to get more comprehensive information. So for example, you may know that a lot of high school students are now engaging in something called dual enrollment, which means they are taking a college course while they are still in high school. We don't have a lot of good ways to really flag when students are in dual enrollment. We'll be able to then link records and look at students who are co-enrolled in a high school and a college to better identify who those dual enrollment and early college credit students are. So there'll be a lot of ways we'll be able to use that linking to get a much more coherent picture of what's happening to students. It'll also help us fill in missing information. So it might be, for example, that CDE, our California Department of Education, collects information about a student's race and ethnicity, but the financial aid office of our state, the California Student Aid Commission, does not collect racial data. It would be possible to link those records together and then get a better understanding about the racial breakdowns of people who are receiving financial aid.
Great. Tony would also like to know if there is a plan to include data from HIPAA-related sources and/or child welfare and de-identify and aggregate data to show trends and make correlations. And then we've got one more after that.
Absolutely. So this data system is intended to include both social service and health information over time. Obviously, it's a complex process to merge together the legal requirements of HIPAA with the educational requirements of FERPA. So a lot of what we've been doing over the last several months is figuring out how to overlap those two legal frameworks to make sure the data would be kept secure. So in the first phase of the data system, there's going to be a couple of data points that will be included related to social service and health. So that's CalWORKs participation, CalFresh participation, Medi-Cal participation, and foster youth status. Based on those four elements, which are considered to be very high value, we'll be able to figure out how well this linking process works. And then the intent is to expand the number of health and social service data points that are available based on looking at what are the strategic data points that people need. What do they need to know a couple of years down the road so that we make sure that that's what gets built first.
Okay, we have another two questions. So the first one is, who will provide you with all of this data? And are you actively seeking out schools or counties, for example, to provide this, in addition to looking at existing data systems?
Oh, yeah, that's really a great question. So the intention is to pull all of the data from the state agencies. And the reason for that is that it's much more streamlined. All LEAs are already uploading information up into the system. Similarly, there are health and social service agencies at the local level that are uploading their information to the state agencies. So by gathering the information from the state agencies, we don't burden local entities to provide that data that's there. So there are 16 named partner entities. Some of the main ones are the California Department of Education, the California Community College Chancellor's Office, CSU, UC, the California Student Aid Commission, the Teacher Credentialing Commission, the Employment Development Department, which provides workforce training, the Department of Social Services, which of course is going to be providing a lot of our early learning and care data going forward, so the Health and Human Services Agency. We've got the California Labor Agency, which will provide stuff like apprenticeship information. I don't know if I'm forgetting any, but as you can see, there's a lot of these different agencies. Oh, the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, which is developing its data sets. And then the only place we're pulling locally is for the independent colleges because they don't currently report to the state. So if you want to know what happened to students at Mills College, we're going to ask them to upload their data directly.
Okay, Lisa has a question. She said she has heard about this project, but she's not very familiar with it. Are there samples somewhere of what the dashboards might look like for different use cases? Also, is there a list of what data inputs are from each of the systems? And she's specifically interested if there are health program enrollment or healthcare data that might be included. And I have one more question after that too.
Absolutely. So that's a great segue for me to show you where our website is. So you can see the URL over on the left, cadatasystem.wested.org. We have a lot of information up here. So that big orange arrow is pointing to you to a spot on our homepage where you can click in. That's where you're going to be able to read the use cases for what would be like sort of why we want to put the data out. You'd be able to see the full list of what the 160 data elements are, the description of how you would request data. So a lot of the information that you need is there. The only health data point we're talking about right now is Medicaid participation. That's it for the first round because it's complex enough to get the health data integrated, and we need to be really clear what the research question is before we bring that information in. Sorry, was there anything else to that question, LeAnn, that I've missed?
No, there's a new question from Victoria.
Okay.
So she was wondering if there's going to be any resources to support smaller agencies like CBOs to effectively utilize the data. For example, if a small FRC were interested in seeing information about the outcomes for those individuals receiving services through the programs across time, would the state be able to help do some of that analysis? Many organizations do not have the systems in place to receive and safeguard the information to the level required by the state. And they have another question after that.
Great. So a lot of the things that you're going to want to know, the high level findings, we're going to actually create short briefs that summarize them on behalf of the user. Also, the infographics are going to show you a lot of the things that people are going to tend to want to know related to the types of data that have been connected to each other. So there will be support in that way where the analysis is already done for you and you can just download it. That you also raised another important point, which we didn't talk about yet, which is that a lot of our planning in the next 6 months is going to focus on how to put in place a really strong professional development technical assistance infrastructure to make sure that people know about the data that's available and how to make use of it. So just because there's a dashboard doesn't mean you know what to do next. So that's one of the things we're really going to be focusing on, and we're kicking up a new subcommittee that's going to be made up entirely of practitioners and people that represent the public who can help us in figuring that out.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left, and I have 2 more questions for you.
Great.
So, has the work group pondered about the implications to the success of this effort if hypothetically a measurable number of parents were to opt out of allowing permission to their child's data?
Well, that's always a concern, and there is an opt-out option that's built into the system. But in other states, that hasn't been a problem. Generally, people the systems exist. If you want to take a look of examples of the types of reports, Kentucky and Washington State both have fantastic dashboards that have a lot of information that's available. So we don't have a reason to believe that we're going to end up with huge gaps in the data. But one of the things that will happen is that issues of data quality will be regularly reviewed. So if that does end up being a problem, the system will take a look at it and figure out what the right approach is, whether it's educating people about the value of the data or the security of the data, or figuring out if there's a different approach that's needed.
Okay, I have a question from Melina. She was wondering if CAIR is included, C-A-I-R, and it looks like it's the immunization registry.
Nope, we have no immunization data. And that hasn't come up as a topic.
That's it for now.
All right. Well, then, as we close out, I just want to make sure that you know how to reach us. Again, this is a list of our website. We have a whole feedback section on our website where you can fill out surveys or participate in an interactive blog to give us your thoughts about it. We have a listserv. This group meets quite regularly, so you can find out about upcoming meetings. They're all open to the public. We have actually a fair amount of public participation over Zoom. There's always time for public comment. We've also recorded and posted all of the meetings, including with transcripts. Almost every meeting has had some sort of background paper or other information. That's all posted for you to use as well. And of course, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me or my colleague LeAnn. Our email addresses are there, and we'd love to answer your questions. So thank you so much for attending, and I can stay on for a few more moments in case there's any more questions.
Kathy and LeAnn, it's Richard. On behalf of Breaking Barriers, we really appreciate you bringing forward this significant effort at the state level to merge data in a meaningful way on behalf of California's residents. Really appreciate your time and expertise today, and look forward to seeing the eventual outcomes of this when it begins to have a public face. So thank you for that. I want to remind folks as we tie up today that the presentations and panel information from today will be posted within about 24 hours. So feel free to come back tomorrow to Breaking Barriers and you'll find the recorded information from everything today. And then of course, next Thursday, join us for session 3 of the Breaking Barriers Symposium 2020. We'll dig deeper into the impacts on community and how sharing responsibility at the community level for services to children, youth, and families is paying dividends in many communities. So we look forward to seeing you all next week. Kathy and LeAnn, thanks again.
Thanks for having us.